Sylvester Systems borrows $110,000 cash on May 15, 2015 by signing a 60-day 12% note. On what date does this note mature? Well, it's pretty easy. All we have to do is count how many days there are between May 15th, starting there, and count 60 days out and see what date we land on. So, real quick, all you really need to know for that is how many days are in each month. I think what they're really getting at is kind of just pay attention to dates, I guess. But if you work out the math, you got 16 days in May, 30 days in June. That leaves you with 14 days you still need to get to 60. So that would put us at July 14th as our 60-day maturity date for this loan. Assume the value of the note equals $110,000, the principal of the loan. Prepare the journal entry to record the issuance of the note. Well, that may sound a little confusing or a little kind of roundabout way of asking it. It gets into a concept that we'll not discuss much at this point, probably not much in this class. Excuse me. Essentially, you could prepay or deduct interest by how much cash you were getting at the outset here. So anyway, I'm not going to get too much into that. Basically, at the issuance of these liabilities, most of the time, whatever the maturity value is, in other words, how much we're going to have to pay back at the end of the loan, not including any interest, just the amount of principal that we have to pay back, and the amount of principal that the percentage rate for interest is calculated on is almost always, for purposes of this class, almost always going to be the amount of cash we're getting. So from the perspective of the company, we're getting that amount in cash, $110,000, and we're going to record that amount as a liability. All right, moving on here. What date does this, did that, okay. Sorry. Oh, I'm sorry, I got thrown off there because, yeah. Anyway, it's just showing us here what we already did in the previous journal entry. So with that in mind, prepare the journal entry to record the payment of the note at maturity. So it's saying use 360 days a year. Like I said before, typically what we do when we're talking about a full year. So 60 days out of 360 times $110,000 times the 12% rate gives us $2,200. All right. So journal entry here to record this. Obviously, we're going to want to completely eliminate this debt. So we're going to show a debit to notes payable for that amount. Then, of course, the interest that we just calculated, we're going to put in as a debit here to show interest expense recognized. And add those two amounts together, and that's the amount of cash that's leaving our hands. And I believe, yes, that takes care of that one. All right, Keisha Company borrows $200,000 cash on November 1st, 2015 by signing a 90-day 9% note with a face value of $200,000. This should look familiar. It's very similar to what we just did, different amounts, of course. When does this mature? Again, I'm not sure why we really need to explicitly walk through counting 90 days again. But if we did, this would be how we did it. So that takes us to January 30th as the maturity date. What is the amount of interest expense recorded on these two dates? First, the end of the year, which of course would be the adjusting entry to show the amount of interest that was applicable to this year, or the portion of the interest, the total interest that is applicable to this year. So we'll take the 200,000 times the 9%. Let's see here, and that would give us, 4,500 would be the total amount of interest that we're going to have to pay on this particular loan. Okay, that doesn't tell us which or how much goes on each of the other the two dates that we're being asked about. Okay, that's just the total that we need to add up to between the two dates that we're going to recognize interest on. So then we're just basically determining what portion of the total should we allocate to each of these two days. So the slides have it still holding strong with an annual calculation. I think it would be just as easy to say, okay, since they're nice and round numbers, 60 days here, 30 days in 2016, that is easily shown to be 2/3 here, 1/3 here, and you can pretty easily determine that that would be 3,000 here, 1,500 here. And that's what we get when we use. And they're basically leaving it in this format, obviously just because when you don't have nice round numbers, this formula will always work. Nice round numbers like we got, maybe we don't even need to write it down. We might just be able to do it in our head. All right, moving on. Keisha Company borrows $200,000 cash on November 1st, 2015 by signing a 90-day 9% note with a face value of $200,000. Sound familiar? Okay, so how do we do the journal entry here as of the date that this is issued? Well, again, we're not worried on the issuance date about anything except the cash and the liability. Okay, not interest, no pun intended, but not interested in interest here again, because no time has passed. We start being interested in interest when time starts to pass. So of course, there was some time that passed between the issuance date and the end of the year, which we determined to be 60 days, or 2/3 of the total amount, and so that is the amount we want to recognize as of the end of the year. Now, we're not going to pay any of it then, so instead of cash going out here, we're going to say, okay, we recognize the interest expense, but now we've basically, in recognizing it, converted it to a liability. Okay, so before we did anything, it wasn't showing up on the books at all yet, and wouldn't have until the date of maturity. But since we need to do this adjustment, we will recognize that interest so that it shows up on the income statement, and then we will just set that into a liability, which we will cancel out. And so this amount, instead of recognizing this amount as interest expense at the maturity date, we will instead use the debit that went into interest expense here. We will use that $3,000 of debit to cancel out interest payable in the journal entry at the end of the day, and you'll see how that looks as well. All right, so now, as of the maturity date, we want to kill the whole liability. So that's going to be the $200,000. And then we're going to, like I said before, instead of recognizing more interest expense associated with the amounts we already recognized last year, the debit portion of that will just be showing us eliminating the interest payable. we still have a little bit of interest expense to recognize, the portion attributable to this year, which is the $1,500. And when you group all of that together, of course, that's the amount of cash that we need to pay out.